And our guest tonight is Dr. Helen Caldicott, a pediatrician from Australia who is currently the national president of the organization Physicians for Social Responsibility. The Physicians for Social Responsibility is an organization which goes back about 20 years and has only recently been resurrected in the past 3.5 years, primarily based on Dr. Caldicott's efforts to address this very pressing issue of our time. Dr. Caldicott is the author of the book Nuclear Madness, which is published by Bantam Books, and she will begin by introducing a film produced by her organization called The Last Epidemic. I hope you will join me in welcoming Dr. Helen Caldicott.
Thank you, Jesse, for that introduction. Well, the film we're about to see is called The Last Epidemic, and it is made from one of our symposia that we hold on the medical consequences of nuclear war, mainly for doctors but also for lay public. And this was held in San Francisco, and you'll see from the film it was because we bombed San Francisco. And we've had about 17 of these symposia in the last couple of years. And really they've been the icebreaker, I think, for the Freeze movement, because they've helped to sensitize people about the medical issues of nuclear war. And nuclear war means us, not the Russians or anyone else. It means us. And you'll see that as we go through the film. It's talking heads, but it's very powerful. It's been shown, for instance, to the staff at the Washington Post. About 30 hard-bitten journalists who, before the film began, were talking about strategies and what about the Russians. And at the end of the film, a lot of them were in tears. And it really changes the way people think, changes the facets of their approach to this whole issue. So see what you think, and then I'll talk to you afterwards.
The fortunate situation is that today we are moving, sliding downhill toward the probability or the likelihood that a nuclear conflict will actually break out, and that somebody will use one of these nuclear weapons in a conflict or perhaps even by accident.
Now, most people I talk with in the United States say, oh, the United States never used nuclear weapons first. But the fact is, it is our oft-stated policy.
Does anyone want to say how they feel? Yeah. Generally, when people see that film, they feel pretty ghastly. It's sort of like as if I've told each one of you, and you were in my office as a patient, that you had a fatal illness and that you may die within a year. And I don't know if any of you have ever thought about how you'd feel if that happened, like if you were told you found a lump in your neck and it was a enlarged lymph gland and you had a lymphoma, and that that you might die from it, that it was a cancer. But what happens is that you go through the stages of grief. And the stages of grief are, the first stage is shock and disbelief, which I'm sure many of you are feeling now. Stunned is the correct word. And disbelief, some of that data isn't quite correct, and it's a bit emotional and it can't really be true. Or else, she's a bad doctor, I'll go to another doctor and see what they say. And then, and Yoko Ono, I think, expressed it well when John Lennon was shot. She said, tell me it's not true, I can't believe it, tell me it's not true. And then the next stage is profound depression as you open up your soul to take in the facts. So profound that sometimes you'd rather be dead even than go through those feelings. And then the next stage is anger, profound anger, just generalized anger. Sometimes it's focused on God or on the doctor or on someone. And then the next stage is bargaining. God, if I do so-and-so, almost a superstitious bargaining, will you let me live? And then finally the dying patient reaches adjustment, if they have time to go through these series of emotions, where they accept the fact they're going to die. And we're all going to die. That's inevitable. That's the one thing we know. Life is a terminal illness. terminal disease. And what the ultimate question is, how do we die, and can we get to the stage where we die with peace, at peace with our Maker and with dignity? And that's the ultimate thing, and as physicians we help people do that. And it's a very beautiful thing if you can do that, because you've almost fulfilled what you're here to do, or you feel you have. And so when people see that film, they start going into the stages of grief if they really take on what that film means. And what that film means is that we can kill the planet. And we're not just going to kill ourselves, but we're going to kill all past generations and everything they've left to us. And we're going to kill all future generations, the seeds of which we carry in our gonads. And we're going to kill our immortality. Now, psychologically, we need a form of immortality to survive. That's why people build buildings like this. That's why they make movies. That's why they write books. That's why they have children. That's why we work so hard. Because inside there's a little voice saying, that's good. When I die, that's here. When I die, my children live on. That's why we have an influence on people, so that that influence will go on. And there are various forms of concepts of immortality, the children and the gene pool, what you leave behind in materialistic works, or living on spiritually speaking in the spiritual cycle, or just being part of the carbon cycle, the life cycle. But it's important. And without that, life sort of ceases to have a meaning. And it's well expressed, I think, in the way the children are feeling right now. I'm sure some of you have been reading what's happening to our children. But the American Psychiatric Association recently looked at 1,000 high school students in Boston and asked them what they thought of their future. And the majority of children answered saying they don't have a future. In that, I won't grow up and have babies and get married. In that, I won't ever get a job like my dad, because I'm going to be killed in a nuclear war. They see no point in going on because they're not going to carry the responsibility from the past to the future. And they're desperate. They say, I cry out for a chance to be heard in this world. And I felt like that since I was 14 and I read On the Beach. Why do they keep making these bombs? Who is protecting us? What are these adults up to, behaving like children? And the children say, why do they keep building bombs? Haven't they got enough already? And if you listen to children, they're very logical. If you listen to adults, they lose their logic. Somehow their left brain hypertrophies and their right brain atrophies, and they should be walking around sort of with their head at a tilt. There's something very badly wrong with us. And what happens is that our emotions are engendered in the primitive hypothalamus or midbrain. And we use this magnificent neocortex, maybe it's an evolutionary aberrant, to justify what our emotions tell us to do. And we can find a reason, which is very logical, for any emotion which is engendered in the midbrain. But the kids are very sensible and they seem to have a balance. And Shakespeare said, out of the mouths of babes and sucklings comes the truth. And I know that because I'm a pediatrician and I treat children. I treat children who have a common fatal genetic disease called cystic fibrosis. And my patients die any time from birth to 30. A few live past 30. But children have said to me, I'm going to die tonight. And they do. And there's no logical reason why they should die tonight or tomorrow night or even in a year. People can prolong their death or die like that if they decide. Death can be a decision, a conscious decision. And the children have a sixth sense that we learn to repress. And they don't believe they're going to grow up. And if we look at it clearly, they're not. In fact, how is it that we're sitting here today on July the 8th, 1982, when every year they discharge 5,000 men from the military who handle nuclear weapons because they're either on drugs or they're mentally unstable? when in an 18-month period recently, the computers in the Pentagon made 151 errors thinking missiles were coming from Russia. And those computers are sophisticated compared to the Soviet computers. What are they doing? When this country's threatened to use nuclear weapons at least 6 times in the world, when the Cold War's hotting up, when there have been numerous accidents with bombs dropping out of aeroplanes. For instance, South or North Carolina was nearly blown up in the 60s when they dropped a 24 megaton bomb out of an aeroplane by mistake, and 5 of the 6 safety catches went off. When someone recently dropped a wrench down a Titan missile silo by accident, and the thing ignited, and the missile was pointing at Moscow, and they weren't sure for a while whether that missile had really gone off heading towards Moscow, starting a nuclear war by an error. And the warhead came off, a 9 megaton bomb, and dropped in a cow pasture. There were cows grazing by it. Many of those safety catches went off. It's a sheer miracle that we're still here. Boston has at least 10 bombs, and many more, targeted on it right now. We're sitting here with a nuclear bomb aimed right at our heads. And it's funny how we live every day without thinking about it, isn't it? And you know what that's called? That's called displacement activity, because you know what I'm saying is really true. But we don't think about it. And it's a sort of an animal way of behaving, because if you have rats in a cage and you threaten them with a life-threatening situation, they run away and do something totally irrelevant to that which threatens them. And that's what we do every day. And by practicing displacement activity and psychic numbing, not thinking about it, that's a form of passive suicide. And that's strange, isn't it? Because our strongest physiological instinct, which is more powerful than sex and eating, is survival. And we've turned it off. And that's mentally sick. And that means we're all going to die if we keep doing this. Because this country makes or recycles 3 to 10 new hydrogen bombs every day. And I'm sure the Russians are doing the same thing. Right now. Drive along Run 28. Many of those firms there are right now designing weapon systems and delivery systems and guidance systems and satellites for the whole nuclear arms race. In 1984, there are going to be 24 Navstar satellites up there. 1984, 24 Navstar satellites to guide the Trident II missiles for first strikes. That's what the shuttle's all about. The shuttle's about military stuff and anti-satellite warfare. That's for counterforce nuclear war, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute. Another thing we do, I think was expressed well by an English psychiatrist recently, is called Manic Denial. We deny this reality with such a mania that we're into hot tubs, jacuzzis, new china for the White House, gourmet foods, you know, stuff we do every day. Mexican restaurants, you know, all the fun we have. How dare we be having fun when we're about to blow up the world? And I don't say just we, I say the nuclear powers. And yet we don't often think about it. Isn't that sick? I think about it because I've got 3 kids. And the most wonderful thing I ever did was give birth to those babies. And above all, I want those kids to grow up and die of natural causes when they're 80 or 90. And you guys, I want you to grow up and not be annihilated, not be turned into charcoal statues, not have your eyes melted. ABC has just written a new play which will come on in the spring, which describes a nuclear war. It starts easily. You know, everyone's working and doing what we do every day, and Russia goes into West Germany, but it could start in hundreds of ways. And suddenly, the men in the Titan missile silos are alerted, and they put their keys in the keyholes. And the weapons go off, and then they see the bombs landing on Kansas City and all around them. And it shows people exploding, melting, vaporizing. It's what's going to happen to us. When you think about it, nothing else we do really matters, does it? And then people say, well, you mustn't be emotional about this. Senator Humphrey said that last night on the television debate. Said you mustn't be, you've got to be rational and logical, mustn't be. I often wonder how these people are going to feel when they, if they survive, are going to be staggering around among the radioactive ruins with their eardrums burst deaf, with their eyes melted or blinded, with all their relatives killed with third-degree burns, how are they going to, are they going to be rational and logical then? It's inappropriate, isn't it? Because you see, we're human beings with feelings. That's who we are. If you read Shakespeare and the greatest literature, it's not about logic and emotion, logic and rationality. It's about feelings, because that's who we are. We feel, we love, we care. When are you happiest? When you're in love. That's what we're about. And I use the analogy when people say I'm emotional. When I have two parents in my office and I tell them their child has leukemia, and I tell them what the prognosis is, their little child might die within a year, bald from chemotherapy and radiation, and they show no emotional reaction, I get them a psychiatrist immediately. It's inappropriate to be unemotional. Well, where are we now in terms of the nuclear arms race? You heard Admiral LaRoque say America's got about 30,000 nuclear weapons and about 9,000 to 10,000 are strategic. Hands up those people who know what a strategic weapon is. Okay, now see, this indicates how much work we have to do. This is the bread and butter of the arms race. 1 + 1 = 2. A strategic weapon is a nuclear warhead on a missile. And you press the button, it goes right out like a little buoy into space, and it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere at 20 times the speed of sound and lands in Russia in half an hour or 20 minutes. That is a strategic weapon. All it is the delivery system is different from the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima from a plane. That's called a tactical nuclear weapon. A strategic one is an intercontinental one that can go from Russia to America or vice versa. The ones that land in Europe are a bit fuzzy because they don't really count Europe as a very special area. The special areas are Russia and America. So the bombs are nominated, their names are derived from how it affects Russia and America. Now, America has 10,000 strategic warheads, 9 to 10, and the rest of those 30,000 are tactical. There are 6 to 7,000 tactical warheads on the front line between East and West Germany right now. Meaning if Russia invades West Germany, the military doctrine says use them or lose them. That means nuclear war. As you heard, all the conventional forces are nuclearized. You don't have a conventional force. They're all nuclearized. Soldiers, when they went into Lebanon in 1957, took nuclear weapons with them. Okay, so Russia has 20,000 nuclear weapons. Of those, about 7,000 are strategic. Those 7,000, according to various estimates, can overkill every American person 20 times. That means they kill you and stand up again. Say, where's the next bomb? Then they kill you and stand up again. That's a Pentagon term. They must believe in reincarnation. The 10,000 American weapons can overkill every Russian person 40 times, for what that's worth. Makes the rubble bounce higher. Now, what are the new plans of this administration? They plan to build 17,000 more strategic warheads in the next 10 years. They've taken 30 years to build just the 10,000. It's going to cost $2.2 trillion in 5 years. It's taken them 35 years to spend $2 trillion on the defence budget. So you can see it's really quickening up. But what are these new weapons? Their first strike. They're Trident II, which can be launched from a Trident II submarine, enough weapons on one Trident sub to destroy every major city in the Northern Hemisphere, and they were planning to build 27 of them in the next 10 years. Why? Don't ask me. They haven't got enough, because we have to be strong. The Trident weapons are guided by the Navstar satellite and land on the Russian missile silo, right on it. Now, the way you kill a Russian missile, and note the word kill, is you have to drop a hydrogen bomb in the air above the silo, and 7 seconds later, land one on the ground. You have to have two to destabilize the weapon in the silo so much that it won't go off. It's got to be 7 seconds, because if it's after that, so much debris is created by the first air blast that the incoming missile can hit a piece of gravel and shatter. That's called fratricide. Okay? Now, the Russians have 1,400 missile silos, so you've got to drop nearly 3,000 bombs, or half of them all at once, and then the other half all 7 seconds later, in exact sequence. They won't be able to do it, but that's the plan. Now, the MX is a first strike weapon too, and that's very accurate, and that can do the same thing. The cruise missile is a first strike weapon too, but it's a bit slower. The cruise missile is launched either from submarines, surface ships, aeroplanes, or ground-launched cruise missiles in Europe. They're going to build about 8,000 of them soon. They're building them now. Interestingly, their rockets were designed first to put on the backs of soldiers so that they could fly like Superman, but it didn't work, so they put them into the cruise missiles. They fly underneath radar, very low to the ground, and they fly over the contours. They have a computerized map in their nose, and they fly up the hills and down the hills and across the bridges like that, see? Except much of Europe is flat, so they might get confused, but that's in the process. They're very accurate. They have a homing device and can go straight in on the silo if necessary, but they do take 2 hours to get there, whereas MX and Trident II take 20 minutes to half an hour. Okay? The other thing is that they've got these Pershing II missiles they want to put in Europe. Incidentally, the cruise missiles, contrary to other strategic weapons, are not verifiable by satellites. You can't see them because they're small. You can hide them in sheds on the backs of trucks. Once they're deployed, 8,000 of them, that's the end of any arms control. Because arms control isn't based on trust, it's based on verification, satellite detection. America is going to destroy arms control, and that's within a year. That's happening. That's why I gave up medicine. Second thing is the Pershing II missiles they want to place in Europe, they're very fast, and they're going to be able to reach Moscow in 6 minutes, and they're going to destroy the command, control, and communication centers of Russia. That's called decapitation in the new Pentagon 5-year war plan, decapitation. Now, because they only take 6 minutes to get there and not the usual 20 or 30, that means the Russians aren't going to have much time to decide whether to press their buttons or not. So they're going to have to go to a system called launch on warning, where computers make decisions whether to launch nuclear war, and they make it in 6 minutes. Launch on warning. Remember that phrase. Very important. Another reason why I gave up medicine. Now, to have a first strike nuclear war, it's important to know that 75% of the Russian strategic weapons, we're not even talking about the tactical ones of the thousands all over the planet, but the strategic or intercontinental, 75% of theirs are based on land, and they're vulnerable to a first strike and can be destroyed by this process, if it works. The trouble is they haven't flown these weapons over the gravitational poles of the gravitational fields of the North Pole, so they're not sure if they won't go off track, but still they think they'll work. Whereas only 25% of the American weapons are land-based. 50% are in the subs and are totally invulnerable, and 25% are in the air, or could be put in the air in the B-52s, and as such, most of those are invulnerable. And as Teddy Kennedy said last night, even if Russia attempts a first strike on your ICBM silos, it doesn't matter, because America can still lob 3,500 bombs on Russia, and there are only about 1,000 at the most worthwhile targets in the Soviet Union. So it just makes the rubble bounce higher. So America's pretty invulnerable from a first strike, but they say there's a window of vulnerability and America could be destroyed, the American missiles, by a first strike. But that's a lie, because they're enough to destroy Russia easily. But anyway, Russia's very vulnerable. Because of their 75 bombs, the rest are in noisy old subs which are easily tracked, and America's working hard on killer submarines right now, and it has a thing called very low frequency, extra low frequency, where they can send messages to the subs to know that they have to go and kill the Russian subs. And also they're working very hard on killer satellites, and that's what the shuttle's partly about. Why do you have to have them? If you're going to have a first strike and launch your weapons, this is complex, but you've got to know about it, you mustn't let the Russians see your weapons coming, because if they see them coming, they can press their button while your first strike is going over to knock out their weapons. So you have to have a satellite to kill their satellite so they can't see the bombs coming, right? And at the same time, you've got to knock out their subs so that they can't just have a few, like 100 weapons, which will destroy the 100 major cities in this country and destroy it as an entity, 100. So you've got to knock out their subs as well. America's really quite advanced on this plan of first strike counterforce nuclear war. And that's what the Reagan START talks are all about. Strategic arms limitation talks. He wants to get rid of 50% of Russia's land-based missiles. And in fact, America can build a few more land-based missiles because they've got so few under his plan, get rid of a few aged submarine missiles and replace them with the new first strike weapons. That's what it's all about. So America can get ahead and spend its $2.2 trillion, a bonanza for the military-industrial complex. Russia will copy and follow, of course, but in time. But in the time, there is a window of vulnerability where America could launch a first strike nuclear war. And the Pentagon and the President talk about a winnable, limited nuclear war, and the 5-year Pentagon War Plan calls for a protracted, prolonged nuclear war. And that 5-year plan was released on the night the START talks began in Geneva. So what more do I need to say? But what worries me is people don't know this stuff, see? Most of you didn't even know what a strategic weapon was. And so when the President comes up with a START talk proposal, people don't understand the pathology of the arms race so that they can analyse what the President's saying. And they have to be able to analyse it to use their democracy. 83% of Americans want a nuclear freeze, only if Russia's not ahead. But what they realise is that America's ahead, technologically speaking, and in number of warheads, but in terms of overkill, both are the same. How many times can you die? So the logic, once again, is left brain logic, leaving the right brain totally out of it. And the kids understand this much better than we do. Now I've lost my train of thought. What was I about to say? I do this in the middle of what I'm saying. I've totally lost it. Come on, coach me. Democracy. Yeah, that's right. So people have to be informed. The trouble is that technology has left everyone behind. I mean, do you know what those characters are up to in Los Alamos and Sandia and Lawrence Livermore and all along 128 and at MIT and at Draper Labs and at Lincoln Labs out here? Do you know what they're doing? I don't even understand the darn stuff. And you know, what we have to do, well, really, we've got a model in medicine. I mean, I could tell you what's wrong with you in terms that you wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. And I'd just pat you on the back and say, there, dear, I'll totally look after you. And you won't know what I'm doing. And how many times have I undressed a patient and there's a big scar on their abdomen? I say, what was this? And she says, well, the doctor took everything out. I've had everything removed, dear. I don't know what they've taken out. Ovaries, uterus, you know, what? Bowel, appendix, probably most of those things. And we used to be very arrogant. Some of us still are. But I've never met a patient who isn't intelligent enough, who would not understand everything I had to say to them if I took the time to explain it to them. Draw the organs, draw the pathology, explain the treatment, how it works, the side effects, and we have to do this with the arms race. And I see this as part of medicine, preventive medicine, teaching people the pathology of the arms race. So what I just told you was giving you a lesson in medicine, the pathogenesis of the arms race. So you can understand when the President makes a proposal, you can understand what he's talking about. You should read a book called Counterforce Syndrome by Robert Aldridge that you can get at PSR. PSR, Physicians for Social Responsibility. It's in Central Square. Counterforce Syndrome. You should read a book, the report to the Secretary General of the United Nations about nuclear weapons. Very important. Read the book, The Final Epidemic, that goes along with this film. Learn about it. Read my book, Nuclear Madness. Learn about it, and then you'll understand. It's not hard to understand. Sounds complex, I'm sure. Some of the stuff I explain you mightn't have understood, although probably you did. And then you'll know what's going on. Now, what can you do? This is a democracy. There's an election in November. The whole House of Representatives is up for election, and 1/3 of the Senate. And it has to be the major issue, and for the first time, it will be. And this is the most important election ever to be held in the United States of America. Because for the first time, the majority of Americans know about nuclear war, and they don't want one. And for the first time, the politicians are starting to say, gosh, if I don't get moving on this, I'm not going to be re-elected. And they're holding their own polls and finding that one of the most important issues they have to address now is the nuclear arms race. Now, this is your chance to use your democracy. And you know, it doesn't matter how much money the military-industrial complex puts into the coffers of the politicians. Who has the ultimate power? You do. And you know, I come from a country where you have to vote, or you get fined. And I'm amazed to come here and find people don't vote. Why don't they vote? In New Hampshire it says, live free or die on the number plates. What does that mean? It means use the democracy. People are dying all over the world now to live in a democracy. What a valuable thing to have. What a precious thing. And what you've got to do is get out, register, and make all your friends register. Go to those political meetings and pressure those politicians to talk about and address the most important subject the world's ever faced. Some of the great statesmen in this country now say we'll be lucky to reach the year 1990. I wonder if this is the last summer. I wondered that last summer. And even if we get a freeze, we've still got 50,000 nuclear weapons. And 90's enough to destroy Russia. 90's enough to destroy this country. And Senator Humphrey said last night, we have to have more, because we have to modernize. And that's been the argument right from the beginning. Do you know what Harry Truman said the night of the first atomic test? Can't quite remember it, but he said, talking about the Russians, not the Japanese, and the Russians were still allies, he said, if this thing works, I'll really have a hammer on those boys. He's talking about the Russians. And that's what's motivated right from the beginning. And it's not communism. Russia's a lousy country and it needs another revolution. But China's communist, just as communist as Russia. And yet now they're friends. And I can remember when they were as bitterly hated as Russia. As bitterly, because we lived in Australia. Yellow peril, domino theory, Vietnam. Now if you go into Bloomingdale's, it's full of Chinese pottery, Chinese silks, you know. And the American Psychiatric Association did a survey of the American people. During about 10 years ago, the Chinese were shrewd, untrustworthy, evil, etc. Now they're hard-working, courageous, reliable, good trading partners. And the same thing with the Germans and the Japanese during the war. Cruel, hostile, untrustworthy, and now they're hard-working, good trading partners and all the rest. You see? And so it's just a concept, a change in psychological concept. It's moving from the line here, where we'll be friends and we'll hate, to the line here, where we'll work together. We don't even have to love, but we'll work together. And you know, I use the analogy, we're on a small lifeboat. We are. The astronauts looked down. They couldn't even see any borders or boundaries in the Middle East when they looked down. And you know, if you don't like the guy in the other end of the lifeboat, you don't drill a hole in his end to fix him. And that's where we are. It's very serious, isn't it? It's the most profound issue that we've ever addressed. I mean, people have written books about the most profound philosophical questions the human race has ever addressed, but not this one. We're the most important generation ever to live. Do you know that? Right now, at this tender age that you are. And each one of you can be as powerful as the most powerful person that ever lived. You have to be. Because they're going to be your kids. And it's your planet. You were born to inherit it. It's yours. That's your heritage out there. The whole world. And as I said in the film, you have to take it on your shoulders and say, I, not he or she, or why don't they, I will fix it. And you can, you know. And when you start doing something, it makes you feel terrific. You meet the most wonderful people, and it's the absolute equalizer. Republicans, Democrats, rich, poor, black and white, everybody. It's for all of us. And it's the ultimate religious question, isn't it? Do we preserve God's creation, or do we destroy it? Are we an evolutionary aberrant to take not our own species, but every other species on the planet? Or are we going to do the right thing? For the first time since we stood on our hind limbs, are we going to stop fighting? Are we going to use this to argue the larynx? That's the only weapon we have now to use. We can't fight anymore. That's why that war in the Falklands looks so stupid, didn't it? Little boys and little girls. So I think we can do it. There's love and goodness in every human being. I know that as a physician, and you all know that. So let's do it, okay? Thanks.